The servant's entrance was supposed to be 3 doors down. Marcus realized his mistake the moment his hand pushed through the ornate barrier, and the darkness swallowed him whole. He froze, every instinct screaming at him to retreat. But the soft sound that reached his ears rooted him to the spot. A broken, gasping breath that he recognized instantly. Someone was crying. Not the performative grief he'd witnessed at diplomatic funerals, but the raw, ugly kind that came from somewhere deep and wounded. His eyes adjusted slowly to the dim chamber. Moonlight from the Veranthi system's 3 satellites filtered through crystalline windows, casting fractured patterns across the floor. And there, in the far corner, sat the most powerful being in the known galaxy. Empress Vaelith Sorn, sovereign of the Veranthi Dominion, ruler of 11 star systems and commander of the greatest fleet ever assembled, had her knees pulled to her chest like a child hiding from monsters. Marcus's breath caught. He should leave. He absolutely should leave. A human, a mere cultural attaché from Earth's fledgling diplomatic corps, had no business witnessing this. The Veranthi valued composure above all else. Their entire civilization was built on the principle of Aki Keth's Ore, the perfect stillness of the heart. For an empress to be seen like this, she would have him executed. Or worse, exiled to the mining colonies where humans were sent when they embarrassed their hosts. He took a step backward. The floor creaked. Her head snapped up, and even in the darkness he could see the wet trails on her silver-blue skin, the way her luminous eyes, usually cold and commanding, were red-rimmed and wild with something that looked terrifyingly like despair. "I walked into the wrong room," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. The alien empress was crying alone in the dark. It wasn't meant to be spoken aloud. It was the kind of absurd observation his mind made when panic set in, the sort of thing he'd mutter to himself in the shower back on Earth. But the words hung in the air between them, ridiculous and true. Vaelith stared at him. Her hand moved toward the panel on her wrist, the one that would summon guards, that would end his insignificant life with a single gesture. "I'm sorry," he continued, because apparently his survival instincts had completely abandoned him. "I'll go. I'll forget I was ever here. I'll forget everything. You cannot forget." Her voice was hoarse, nothing like the crystalline authority she projected in the council chambers. "Your species lacks the neural pathways for selective memory suppression. It's an expression, a human thing. It means I won't tell anyone." "Why?" The question caught him off guard. "Why what? Why would you not tell anyone?" She rose slowly, and even diminished by grief. She was magnificent. 7 feet of lean muscle and predatory grace, her ceremonial robes hanging loose around her shoulders. "You could sell this information. There are factions who would pay handsomely to know that the Empress weeps in empty rooms. My enemies would—" "I'm not interested in your enemies." She went still. Among the Veranthi, interrupting someone of higher status was grounds for immediate punishment. Marcus had sat through enough briefings to know this. He'd also sat through enough briefings to know that he was already dead the moment he opened that door. So what did one more offense matter? "You're not interested," she repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. "No. I'm interested in finding the servant's passage so I can get back to my quarters before anyone notices I got lost." "Again." He paused. "It's the 3rd time this week. Your palace is... architecturally aggressive." Something flickered across her face. It took him a moment to recognize it as confusion. "You do not fear me." "I'm terrified of you," Marcus admitted. "But I'm also tired, and I've been on my feet for 14 hours translating trade negotiations that your ministers could have resolved in 20 minutes if they weren't so obsessed with establishing dominance hierarchies through semicolon placement. So right now my fear is competing with my exhaustion, and exhaustion is winning." The silence stretched between them. He waited for the killing blow, the cold dismissal, the summoning of guards. Instead, she laughed. It was a broken sound, more sob than humor, but it was unmistakably a laugh. Her hand dropped from the panel on her wrist. "You are either very brave or very stupid, human. My file says adequate, actually. I've seen it. Your file says many things." She moved closer, and he forced himself not to step back. "It says you lost your family in the Proxima incident. It says you volunteered for deep space diplomatic service 3 days after their memorial. It says you have no close connections remaining on Earth." Marcus's chest tightened. "You read my file." "I read everyone's file. It passes the time." She stopped an arm's length away, studying him with those luminous eyes. "You came here to run away. From grief. From memory. From a world that reminded you of everything you had lost. With respect, Your Majesty, I don't think you brought me here to discuss my psychological profile." I did not bring you here at all. You walked into the wrong room. Right? The wrong room where the Empress of 11 star systems sits alone in the dark, crying. He met her gaze steadily. Why are you here, Your Majesty? Why aren't you with your court, your advisors, My what? My family. The bitterness in her voice could have corroded starship hulls. I have no family. I have subordinates and rivals, and an endless parade of suitors who see me as nothing more than a pathway to power. I have a throne that demands everything and gives nothing. I have an empire that watches my every breath for signs of weakness. And yet, here you are, showing weakness to a human who can't even find the bathroom without a map. She blinked. You are not what I expected. I get that a lot. Marcus hesitated, then made a decision that was probably going to get him killed. Do you want to talk about it? Whatever made you cry, you cannot possibly understand. Probably not. But I can listen. I'm told I'm adequate at that too. For a long moment, she simply looked at him. Then, slowly, she sank back down to the floor, her back against the wall, her knees drawn up once more. The council has given me an ultimatum, she said quietly. I am to choose a consort by the next lunar cycle, or they will choose one for me. Some ancient Veranthi lordling with good bloodlines and ambitious relatives. Someone who will smile at me in public and scheme against me in private. Someone who will share my bed and count the days until he can claim my throne. Marcus lowered himself to sit across from her, maintaining a respectful distance. And you don't want that. I want. She stopped, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. I want someone to see me. Not the Empress. Not the symbol. Not the power. Just me. Vaelith. The woman who is tired and lonely, and afraid that she will spend her entire life surrounded by people who want something from her. That sounds exhausting. It is. She looked at him, and in that moment, stripped of ceremony and expectation, she looked painfully young. How do you do it? How do you humans bear the loneliness? Badly, mostly. We drink. We work too much. We throw ourselves into deep space diplomatic missions on alien worlds. He shrugged. We find moments. Small ones. A conversation with a stranger who doesn't expect anything from us. A laugh in an empty room. We collect those moments like currency, and we hope they're enough to get us through to the next one. And if they're not enough, then we keep looking. We're stubborn that way. She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its rawness. You should go, Marcus Chen, before someone finds you here, before this becomes something that neither of us can explain. He rose to his feet. The servants' passage? Fourth door on the left. The one with the crescent moon carved into the frame. Thank you, Your Majesty. He was at the door when her voice stopped him. Marcus. He turned. Tomorrow, the council will present me with a list of acceptable consorts. I'm permitted to add one name of my own choosing, a symbolic gesture that everyone knows will be overruled. She paused. I find myself curious what would happen if I added the name of a human, one who is tired and lost and brave enough to sit with an empress in the dark. And that would cause a scandal. Yes. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. It would. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Marcus slipped through the door and into the dark corridor beyond, his heart pounding with something that felt dangerously like hope. The scandal was immediate and spectacular. Marcus learned of his nomination the way he learned most things in the Veranthi court, through the barely concealed horror on his supervisor's face. They're saying she's lost her mind. Ambassador Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, hissed at him across the breakfast table. They're saying she's deliberately sabotaging the succession process. They're saying, I know what they're saying. Marcus pushed his food around his plate, appetite gone. I can hear them saying it. Veranthi acoustics are remarkably good. Around them, the diplomatic mess hall buzzed with whispered conversations and pointed stares. The other human attaches kept their distance, as if whatever madness had infected him might be contagious. You need to withdraw, the ambassador said. Immediately. Before this becomes an incident, I can't withdraw. Only the Empress can remove a name from the list. Then ask her to remove it. I'm not sure I want to. The ambassador's face went through several colors before settling on a mottled purple that probably wasn't healthy. Marcus, listen to me very carefully. You are a junior cultural attaché. You translate documents and fetch refreshments for actual diplomats. You cannot, become consort to the most powerful being in the known galaxy. The Veranthi will never accept it. The council will never allow it. And even if by some miracle they did, you would spend the rest of your very short life as a political target. Everyone who wants to hurt her will hurt you first. I know. Then why? Marcus thought about a dark room and a broken laugh. About luminous eyes stripped of their armor. About the first real conversation he'd had since his family died. Because she asked, he said simply. And because no one else would. The ambassador stared at him for a long moment, then stood abruptly. I'm filing a formal objection with Earth Command. For your own protection. You do that. He was left alone at the table, which suited him fine. He had a lot of thinking to do. The summons came 3 hours later. Not from the Empress, but from the Council of Stars, the 12 most powerful Veranthi nobles, who theoretically advised the throne but practically controlled most of the Empire's actual governance. Marcus had observed them from the translator's booth many times, ancient, calculating, and utterly convinced of human inferiority. The council chamber was designed to intimidate, and it succeeded admirably. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow. Crystalline pillars hummed with contained energy. 12 thrones arranged in a semicircle, each occupied by a Veranthi who looked at Marcus, as though he were an insect that had wandered onto their dinner plate. You are Marcus Chen, the eldest of them said. Lord Vethgel, according to Marcus's briefings, a hardliner, who had argued against the human alliance from the beginning. The human who presumes to court our Empress. I presume nothing, Lord Vethgel. Her Majesty added my name to the list. I merely haven't objected to it. A technicality. You could have refused the honor. With respect, I wasn't aware I had been offered an honor. I was under the impression I had been nominated as a candidate. The honor comes later, if chosen. A ripple of displeasure moved through the council. Veranthi didn't appreciate humans who understood their language's nuances. Let us speak plainly, another counselor said. Lady Sirith, the moderate faction's leader. You are unsuitable. Your species is young, your world is poor, and you personally possess no significant status, wealth, or military power. The only possible reason the Empress could have nominated you is to mock this council's authority. Perhaps, Marcus said. Or perhaps she nominated me because I was kind to her when no one else was. The silence that followed was absolute. Explain, Lord Vethgel said softly, dangerously. I would rather not. Her Majesty's private moments should remain private. You dare. I dare to respect her dignity, yes. I understand that might be an unfamiliar concept in this chamber. Several counselors rose from their thrones. The energy in the crystalline pillars pulsed brighter. Marcus was fairly certain he had just signed his death warrant, but he found that he didn't particularly care. Enough. The voice came from behind him. Marcus turned to find Empress Vaelith striding into the chamber, her ceremonial armor gleaming, her expression carved from ice. Your Majesty, Lord Vethgel said, recovering quickly. We were merely interviewing your candidate. I can see that. You were also threatening him, which I believe falls outside the Council's advisory mandate. She moved past Marcus to take her position on the central throne, but as she passed, her hand brushed his shoulder, a touch so brief it might have been accidental. It wasn't. This human is under my protection, she continued, settling onto her throne. Any harm that comes to him will be treated as an attack on the throne itself. Is that understood, Your Majesty? Surely you cannot be serious about this nomination. Lady Sirith leaned forward. The diplomatic implications alone, I am entirely serious. Marcus Chen has been added to the candidate list, and there he will remain until the selection is complete. The other candidates will refuse to participate. No Veranthi of standing will lower themselves to compete with a human. Then they will forfeit their positions, and the human will win by default. Vaelith's smile was sharp as a blade. I'm certain that would make for an interesting precedent. Marcus watched the exchange with growing amazement. This was not the grieving woman he had found in the dark. This was the Empress in full command, wielding power like a surgical instrument, cutting through opposition with precise, devastating strokes. And yet, when she glanced at him, just for a moment, he saw her. The real her, looking out from behind the mask. The selection process will proceed as scheduled, Vaelith announced. The candidates will be tested according to tradition. The worthy will advance, the unworthy will be eliminated. If the human fails, so be it. But he will be given the same opportunity as any other. And if he succeeds? Lord Vethgel asked, his voice dripping with contempt. Then the council will have to accept that perhaps there are qualities they have overlooked in humanity. She rose. This audience is concluded. She swept out of the chamber without another word. Marcus was escorted out by guards who handled him with considerably more care than they had on the way in. He found her waiting in an antechamber. Her armor already half removed, her attendants dismissed. That was quite a performance, he said. It was necessary. The council responds to strength, not reason. She turned to face him. You handled yourself well in there. Most humans would have groveled. Groveling seemed counterproductive. It would have been. They would have despised you for it. She studied him with those luminous eyes. You really meant it, didn't you? What you said about respecting my privacy. Of course I meant it. Why? You could have used that moment against me. Revealed my weakness, gained favor with the council, positioned yourself as someone with valuable information. Is that what a Veranthi would have done, without hesitation? Marcus shook his head. I'm not Veranthi. No. Something shifted in her expression, a softening he was beginning to recognize. No, you're not. She reached out and touched his face, her fingers cool against his skin. It was an intimate gesture, the kind that would have been unthinkable in public, and even here it felt like crossing a line. The tests will not be easy, she said quietly. They are designed to break candidates, to expose their weaknesses, to prove their unworthiness. The council will ensure that yours are especially brutal. I assumed as much. And yet you're not withdrawing. Would you like me to? Her hand dropped. She stepped back, and for a moment, the Empress reasserted itself. Distant, controlled, unreadable. What I would like is irrelevant. This is politics. I cannot afford to want things. Everyone can afford to want things. The question is whether they're brave enough to admit it. She was silent for a long moment. Then, the first test is tomorrow. Combat proficiency. You will be expected to face a Veranthi warrior in single combat. I'm going to lose. Almost certainly. Then what's the point? The point is not to win. The point is to reveal character under pressure. She moved toward the door, then paused. Marcus, when you face your opponent tomorrow, don't try to be what you're not. Don't try to fight like a Veranthi. Fight like a human. Whatever that means to you. She was gone before he could respond. Marcus stood alone in the antechamber, thinking about what it meant to fight like a human. He thought about Proxima. About the moment when everything had been taken from him. About the choice he had made afterward. Not to rage, not to despair, but to keep moving forward, one step at a time, even when forward felt like nowhere. Maybe that was what it meant to fight like a human. Maybe it was time to find out. The arena was ancient, carved from living stone during an age when the Veranthi had settled their differences through blood rather than bureaucracy. Thousands of nobles filled the tiered seating, their silver-blue faces turned toward the sand below with hungry anticipation. They had come to watch a human die. Marcus stood in the center of the arena, a practice blade in his hand, dull-edged, but heavy enough to break bones. Across from him his opponent was already drawing appreciative murmurs from the crowd. Lord Kethvor was a giant even by Veranthi standards, nearly 8 feet of muscle and combat experience. He had served in the border wars, had killed enemies in numbers that Marcus's briefings politely declined to specify. He held his own practice blade as though it were an extension of his body. Little human, Kethvor said, his voice carrying to every corner of the arena. I will try to make this quick. Out of respect for your Empress's inexplicable attachment to you. That's very considerate, Marcus replied. I'll try to make it interesting. Out of respect for everyone who came all this way to watch. Kethvor blinked. Then he laughed. A genuine laugh. Not the cruel mockery Marcus had expected. You have spirit. Good. Spirit makes the breaking more satisfying. The signal chime sounded. Kethvor moved. Marcus had trained in basic self-defense, as all diplomatic corps members did. He knew how to take a fall, how to protect vital areas, how to survive long enough for help to arrive. None of that training prepared him for the sheer speed of a Veranthi warrior in full attack. He dodged the first strike by pure instinct, the blade whistling past his ear. The second caught him in the ribs, driving the breath from his lungs. The third would have taken his head off if he hadn't dropped to the sand at the last possible moment. Too slow, Kethvor observed. Your species' reflexes are unfortunately limited. Marcus rolled to his feet, his ribs screaming in protest. We prefer to think of it as dramatic timing. The next exchange was worse. Kethvor wasn't playing anymore, and Marcus found himself driven back across the arena, parrying desperately, taking hits that he couldn't avoid. Blood ran from a cut on his forehead. His left arm hung at an angle that suggested something important had been damaged. The crowd was cheering now, not for him but for the spectacle of his destruction. This was what they had come to see. This was confirmation of everything they believed about humans. Marcus caught Kethvor's blade on his own, their weapons locked together. Up close he could see the contempt in the Veranthi's eyes. Yield, Kethvor said. You have shown courage. There is no shame in acknowledging defeat. Marcus thought about yielding. It would be the sensible thing to do. Preserve what remained of his body. Accept the inevitable. Walk away with whatever dignity he had left. Then he looked up at the royal box. Vaelith sat rigid in her throne, her face a mask of perfect composure. But her hands were gripping the armrests so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. And in her eyes, he saw something he recognized. Fear. Fire. Not for herself. For him. No, Marcus said. No, I don't yield. Kethvor's expression shifted from contempt to something like respect. Then you will be broken. Maybe. Marcus pushed back against the locked blades, knowing it was hopeless, knowing he couldn't match Veranthi's strength. But I've been broken before. I'm still here. What happened next wasn't strategy. It wasn't training. It was the desperate, stubborn refusal to stay down that humans had carried in their bones since they first crawled out of the mud and decided that the universe would not defeat them. Marcus stopped trying to fight like a Veranthi. He stopped trying to match strength with strength, speed with speed. Instead, he did what humans had always done when faced with superior opponents. He adapted. He let Kethvor's next strike connect, but twisted with it, using the momentum to spin inside the Veranthi's guard. His damaged arm screamed as he drove his elbow into the nerve cluster at Kethvor's hip, a weak point that the Veranthi's armor didn't cover because no one expected an opponent to get that close. Kethvor grunted in surprise and stumbled. Marcus didn't let up. He couldn't win a prolonged fight, so he wouldn't fight prolonged. He attacked with everything he had, targeting joints and pressure points, going for pain rather than damage, refusing to give Kethvor time to recover his balance. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't honorable by Veranthi standards. It was ugly and brutal and desperately, stubbornly human. And for 30 glorious seconds it worked. Then Kethvor adapted too, and Marcus found himself on his back in the sand, the Veranthi's blade at his throat. Yield, Kethvor said again. Marcus couldn't speak. His lungs weren't working properly, and he was fairly certain he had cracked ribs on top of whatever else was broken. But he managed to shake his head. Kethvor stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he withdrew his blade and stepped back. I yield, Kethvor announced to the silent arena. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in outrage. This was wrong. This violated everything they understood about combat, about honor, about the proper order of the universe. He did not defeat you. Lord Vethkel's voice cut through the noise. He lies broken at your feet. He did not yield. Kethvor's voice was calm, certain. I asked him twice, and twice he refused. According to the ancient laws, a warrior who refuses to yield cannot be defeated except by death. To kill him would be murder, not victory. He looked down at Marcus with something that might have been respect. The human passes the test. The arena dissolved into chaos. Marcus lay in the sand, staring up at the alien sky, wondering if he had won or just found a more interesting way to lose. Then Vaelith was there, kneeling beside him, her hands gentle on his face. You impossible fool, she whispered. You could have died. Didn't though. You're broken, been broken before. He tried to smile, though it probably looked more like a grimace. Still here. She laughed. That same broken sound from the dark room, but different now. Warmer. Yes, you are. She helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as he swayed. The crowd had gone quiet again, watching their empress hold a battered human upright in the sand. This changes nothing, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The tests continue. The selection proceeds. But she didn't let go of him. And when she looked at the council's box, there was something fierce in her eyes. This changes nothing, she repeated quietly, for his ears alone. And it changes everything. The tests continued for 3 more weeks. Marcus faced challenges designed to break him. Trials of endurance, puzzles of logic, demonstrations of leadership. Each time he failed by Veranthi standards and succeeded by his own. He couldn't outthink the scholars or outplan the strategists or outlast the warriors, but he could adapt. He could persist. He could find the human angle that no one expected. The other candidates dropped out, one by one. Not because Marcus defeated them, but because they couldn't stomach competing with him. To share a stage with a human, to risk losing to a human, it was more than their pride could bear. By the final week, Marcus was the only candidate remaining. They're saying you cheated, Vaelith told him during one of their increasingly frequent private meetings. They're saying I rigged the tests in your favor. Did you? I made them fair. For a human, that probably felt like rigging. She was sitting closer to him than protocol allowed, their shoulders almost touching. Over the weeks, the distance between them had slowly collapsed, pulled inward by gravity neither of them fully understood. The council is furious. They're talking about invalidating the selection entirely. Can they do that? Technically, no. The selection process is sacred. It predates the council itself. But they can make things very difficult for us. She paused. For me, then maybe you should let them invalidate it. Choose someone else, someone who won't cost you your throne. She turned to look at him, and he was struck again by how much she had changed since that night in the dark room. The grief was still there. He suspected it always would be. But it was no longer crushing her. Something had shifted. Do you know why I chose you? She asked. Because I was convenient? Because I was a statement? Because you saw me? Her voice was soft but steady. Not the Empress. Not the symbol. Me. And instead of using what you saw against me, you tried to help. You sat with me in the dark and asked nothing in return. I asked for directions to the servants' passage. You know what I mean. He did. He just wasn't sure he deserved the weight she was placing on that moment. Vaelith. It was the first time he had used her name without her title. It felt like crossing a line, one of many they had been approaching for weeks. I'm not what your empire needs. I'm not a warrior or a statesman or even a particularly good diplomat. I'm just a man who got lost and stumbled into something he doesn't fully understand. You're more than that. She took his hand. Another line crossed, another barrier fallen. You're kind. You're stubborn. You're brave in ways that have nothing to do with fighting. You see people clearly, even when they don't want to be seen. Her fingers intertwined with his. You make me feel like I don't have to be perfect. Like I can be tired and afraid and still be worthy. You are worthy. You were worthy before I ever walked into that room. Perhaps. But I didn't believe it until you showed me. She leaned in, and he met her halfway. And when their lips touched, it felt like the culmination of something that had been building since the first moment. The collision of two lonely people who had somehow found each other across the vast indifference of space. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, two souls testing whether this impossible thing could be real. Then her hand came up to cup his face, and his arm wrapped around her waist, and the gentleness gave way to something deeper. Something hungry. She pulled back eventually, breathless, her forehead resting against his. The council will never accept this, she whispered. I know. They will try to separate us. They will try to destroy you. I know. Are you afraid? Marcus thought about Proxima. About the fire and the silence and the endless gray months that followed. About running to the stars because Earth had become too full of ghosts. Yes, he said. But I've been afraid before. It didn't stop me then. It won't stop me now. She kissed him again, fierce and quick, then stood and walked to the window. Outside, the three moons of Veranthi Prime were rising, casting their fractured light across the palace grounds. Tomorrow is the selection ceremony, she said. The council will make their final objection. I will overrule them. And then, whatever happens next, we will face it together. Together, Marcus agreed. He stood and joined her at the window. After a moment, she leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. I never thanked you, she said quietly. For what? For walking into the wrong room, for staying when you could have left, for seeing me when everyone else saw only the crown. Marcus pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I think maybe I walked into exactly the right room. I just didn't know it at the time. The selection ceremony was held in the great hall of the palace, before every noble, dignitary, and ambassador in the Veranthi Dominion. Marcus stood at the base of the throne, wearing the formal robes of a consort candidate, robes that had been hastily modified to fit a human frame. The council stood in opposition, their faces carved from stone. This is your final opportunity, Your Majesty, Lord Vethgul announced. Withdraw the human's candidacy and select a proper consort. The council will accept any Veranthi of adequate standing. Vaelith sat upon her throne, every inch the Empress, cold, commanding, untouchable. But Marcus could see a slight tremor in her hands. The cost this moment was extracting from her. The selection process has concluded, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. One candidate remains. By the ancient laws, he has proven himself worthy. Worthy? Lady Cirith stepped forward. He is human. He has no standing, no bloodline, no power. He offers the Empire nothing. He offers something none of you ever have. Vaelith rose, and the hall fell silent. He offers truth, compassion, partnership without agenda. She descended from the throne, step by deliberate step, until she stood beside Marcus. He offers to see me as I am, not as he wishes me to be. And in return, I choose to see him as he is, not a human, not a political statement, but a man. My equal. My chosen. She took his hand. I name Marcus Chen as my consort. Any who dispute this choice dispute my authority as Empress. And I remind you all that the penalty for treason is death. The silence that followed was absolute. Then from the back of the hall came a single sound. Applause. Kethvor, the warrior Marcus had faced in the arena, was clapping slowly, deliberately. After a moment, others joined him. Not many, but enough. The council looked at each other, calculating odds, measuring the winds of change. Lord Vethkel stepped back. "The Empress has spoken," he said, his voice flat with barely contained fury. "May the Dominion prosper under her wisdom." It wasn't acceptance. It wasn't even acknowledgement. But it was surrender, however temporary. And right now that was enough. Later, in the quiet of her private chambers, Vaelith let the mask fall. "That was terrifying," she admitted, sinking onto a couch. "I thought for a moment that Vethkel would actually challenge me. Would you have won? I don't know. And I would rather never find out." She held out her hand and Marcus took it, sitting beside her. "We're not safe, you know. This is just the beginning. The council will scheme. Enemies will emerge. There will be attempts on your life, probably on mine as well. I assumed as much. And you're still not running. I told you." He brought her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "I've been running for years. I'm tired of it. I'd rather stand and face whatever comes as long as I'm facing it with you." She leaned into him and he wrapped his arms around her, and for a long moment they simply held each other, two broken people who had somehow found wholeness in each other's jagged edges. "I love you," she said quietly. "I don't know when it started. Maybe that first night when you sat with me in the dark and asked for nothing. Maybe later, when you refused to yield even when you were broken. But I know it now, and I need you to know it too. I love you too." The words came easier than he had expected. I didn't think I could. After Proxima, after everything, I thought that part of me was dead. But you brought it back. You reminded me what it feels like to hope for something. She tilted her head up to kiss him, and this time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. Just the two of them, tangled together in the moonlight, learning the geography of each other's hearts. When they finally separated, she was smiling, a real smile, unmarred by grief or duty. "So," she said, "what happens now? Now?" Marcus pulled her closer, tucking her head under his chin. "Now we figure out how to run an empire together. Now we show the universe that humans and Veranthi can be more than allies. They can be partners. Now we build something that lasts." "That sounds like a lot of work." "It will be. But I hear I'm adequate at things. It says so in my file." She laughed, and the sound of it, bright and clear and utterly unguarded, was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. Outside, the three moons of Veranthi Prime rose higher, casting their light across a galaxy that was about to change in ways no one could have predicted. Inside, an empress and her consort held each other close, and dared to believe that love was stronger than politics, that hope was stronger than fear, and that sometimes, walking into the wrong room was exactly the right thing to do. The stars watched, ancient and patient, as two small figures against the vastness of space chose each other over everything else. And in the end, that was enough.